In this last section on buyer's consolidation, we're going to try to help answer the question to integrate or not to integrate. And what we mean by that is, do we want to tie in together CFS services with international transportation services, consolidating cargo from multiple vendors into containers going to different destinations, but using the same company as the CFS operator to do the international freight forwarding, a 3PL. As a proviso, and as we often do, we're not here to say one is better than the other. We just want to point out all of the variables in the equation that we're portraying. In the end, it's up to the importer to decide whether or not to integrate or decouple these services. Yet another decision that importers must make related to a buyer's consult program is whether or not to integrate those CFS services with ocean transportation. We've said this a couple of times. There are hundreds of 3PLs around the world that offer CFS at origin services for buyer's consult programs, as well as all of the transportation, drayage to the port, ocean freight forwarding, customs clearance at destination. This is what we're discussing right now. To be clear, in our second bullet point, any CFS operation can be a standalone setup without ties to the ocean freight forwarder. Some companies find it more beneficial to decouple these services. And again, that's a strategic decision that importers have to make. There is absolutely no rule or regulation that says U.S. importers have to use the same 3PL service provider in the CFS as they do for transportation. On the other hand, to point out the second side of the argument in our third bullet point, conversely, the importer can strategically decide to use the same company for both CFS, buyer's consult work, and ocean freight forwarding. Many companies do decide to do just that. While the decision to integrate or not to integrate lies with the importer, there are certain advantages to this type of approach. Well, which type of approach? The integrated approach. And just as a brief aside, the student will recall that the title of our very first module was an integrated approach to importing into the United States. That module really set the stage for more detailed conversations around integrating logistics services. We are at the point where we are talking about them specifically. The first advantage, going back to the idea of transmitting purchase orders electronically to vendors overseas, first sub-bullet, the unified method for transmitting that PO information, hopefully out into a cloud-based trading platform that we've talked about a bunch of times, where not only the vendors can download PO information, the CFS operator can at least have visibility into purchase orders so they can see what's going on with vendors and the timing of delivery of cargo from vendors into the CFS based on those purchase orders. If we're going to run a buyer's consult operation in a CFS as an importer, the CFS operator has to have access or at least visibility into the purchase order so they know what's coming in and what to check against when the cargo is actually delivered, what quantities, what items, etc. In an integrated approach, we can send that information once. Second sub-bullet, if a SaaS-based import management tool is used, all parties have access to the same info and one version of the truth. This is a continuation of what we were just saying, but this whole concept of one version of the truth, the same source of the same information, is very powerful. For example, if we were to decouple the sharing of PO information, we sent a bunch of emails with POs on them to our vendors and then emails to our CFS operators, the potential for mistakes, for confusion, is clearly high. SaaS-based model, one version of the truth. Another advantage is that when we integrate these services, we have a single point of contact for suppliers at origin. The suppliers can talk to the CFS, who in turn is the ocean freight forwarder. If they were decoupled, the supplier would be talking to two different parties all the time. In that sense, an integrated approach is beneficial to the suppliers, not just the importer. Last sub-bullet, greater visibility into the generation of forwarders' cargo receipts. We've talked ourselves blue in the face about FCRs. Their importance for different reasons should be clear by now. We need visibility into the generation of an FCR. When it's an integrated approach, it's just easier. As the CFS is ready to start stuffing containers for shipment to various destinations around the U.S., those containers have to be spotted at the CFS. We've defined what spotting containers means before. We don't need to go into that. But when the CFS and the forwarder are the same company, again, it's just easier to coordinate with the steamship line now, yet another external party, to get those containers spotted at the CFS so they can be stuffed in time to be shipped to where they need to go. Electronic bookings can be made from the CFS operation, an ideal scenario, because who's going to know when bookings need to be made? The company that's moving the cargo. How are they going to know when to make bookings? When they have access to information of cargo coming into the CFS. Drayage can be coordinated from the CFS as well. We talked about that in our previous section when we looked at the West Pearl River Delta versus the East Pearl River Delta. We want the CFS to be in close proximity to the port of loading, the port of export. But wherever the CFS is, the drayage has to be coordinated. We can do that in an integrated fashion too. Commercial docks can be created and transmitted from the CFS. We talked about the scenarios where that is a necessity. And a document that we saw several sections ago, back in Module 6 actually, the advanced ship notice can be sent from the CFS by the forwarding operation within that CFS. And we will recall that for customs clearance purposes, for sharing information about how to distribute cargo once it gets to the United States, an advanced ship notice, an ASN, is really, really important. Some others, Buyer's Consol is all about knowing what cargo from what vendors and what quantity are in a given container. As we know, Buyer's Consol is about taking purchase orders of cargo from vendors and splitting them up and putting the goods in different containers, with the split cargo of a bunch of other vendors too. We need to know what's in a container at an item and a purchase order level. That is easier to communicate when we take an integrated approach. A good factor to consider, a single point of contact for the U.S. importer. With a 15-hour time difference on the West Coast, for example, with South China, we don't want to be up at 3 o'clock in the morning talking to a CFS and a freight forwarder. We want to be talking to a single point of contact, one throat to choke, as it is sometimes called. Extending this idea of integration a little bit further, CFS and ocean transportation can be integrated with customs clearance in the U.S. 3PLs do this all the time. They do all of the origin work, they do all of the transportation work, and they do the customs brokerage in the U.S. That is very, very common. And then, from a trade compliance perspective, albeit U.S. trade compliance requirements, the automated manifest and ISF 10+2 filing can be coordinated easily through the CFS and the ocean freight forwarder as an integrated whole as well. A couple of last points to make. We talked in our previous section about selecting 3PLs, CFS operators, that have a demonstrated ability to work with detailed standard operating procedures and routing guides. We have to have an SOP for the CFS. We definitely have to have an SOP for the ocean transportation. What we're saying in the first sub-bullet point is that these SOPs can be linked together between the CFS and ocean forwarding. Second sub-bullet, there will be fewer invoices from service providers. We as the importer won't be getting invoices from service providers at origin and then different invoices from ocean freight forwarders and then a different invoice from the customs broker in the United States. Consolidation of services into fewer hands by definition means fewer invoices because there are fewer service providers. Our KPIs are a little bit easier to monitor. And going back to one of our 4 objectives of supply chain, landed cost calculations are less cumbersome. We have better visibility into the costs. We can isolate those costs and assign them on a prorated basis to specific items across the entire inbound supply chain. That will wrap up our rather lengthy discussion on buyer's consolidation. When we return, We will continue our analysis of import operating models. Now we're moving on to direct to store. We shall see you hopefully very soon.